Bonjour tout le monde. Welcome to episode 3 of TechPoutine, joined with Ian, Jeffrey, Gabriel, and Eleonore and myself, Nectar. So very happy that we're all back for a third episode. I guess maybe a first big news item of the week is Ian moving back from Magog to Montreal. So
I love it. I love it. It's big news.
that's some really big news. I don't know if people knew on the pod. So that's really item number one. So Ian,
Yeah,
welcome back to Montreal, man.
Glad to be back.
yeah. I have to say, it's going to be a really great moment for the tech ecosystem in Montreal. It's great to have smart entrepreneurs like Ian back in the city. It's a testament, I think, to how we've been able to attract talent back.
Yeah, and then the other smaller news item is Harley from Shopify coming back, making a lot of waves this week. So like Harley, obviously people that don't know, president of Shopify, announced. I think he did the announcement at Founder Fuel, if I'm not mistaken,
Yeah.
back in July that he's moving back, and a lot of positive press, I guess, for someone moving back. So yeah, throw it open to you guys as to what you think. Comments on obviously the big news, Ian, and then Harley.
Let's not talk about me. We're not going to talk about me. It's not about me.
Yeah, on my end, I think it's great news. Definitely, Harley has a connection to Montreal. He spent part of his childhood here in the early days of the tech ecosystem in Montreal. He was involved as a mentor at Founder Fuel and was connected to a lot of people in the city. So I think it's great. He's been on a lot of different radio shows and podcasts talking about why he chose to move back to Montreal, and he had a lot of really great reasons about that in terms of the culture, in terms of the languages, in terms of just being a great place to live, but also a great place to work from. And so I think it's great to have him back here. It's nice. Ian and I were at a dinner last week in Westmount at Park Restaurant on Victoria, which is an amazing restaurant. And we were about 15 founders having dinner, catching up after the summer. And kind of randomly, Harley was there with his family, grabbing dinner as well to go. And it was just nice to see him. It's the type of thing, if an entrepreneur doesn't live in the city, you don't have that opportunity to bump into them and just kind of catch up quickly. And so proximity does help. And having an entrepreneur like Harley with the experience that he has, not a lot of people talk about it on a daily basis, but the reality is Shopify is one of Canada's largest companies. I think it's still Canada's largest tech company. And to have an executive from the largest tech company in Canada in Montreal, I believe will have some impact.
Well, yeah, I agree, but not only in Montreal, but moving back to Montreal. You know what I mean? Like, it's one thing to start a company and or be an executive at a large company and live in Montreal, but it's a different thing. Like, he was in Ottawa and coming back to Montreal is a huge sign, right? Like, the stereotype would be he'd go to Toronto, right? Like everyone is always thinks of Toronto as the big city. So I think it is a really big move for him to come back to Montreal. It says a lot about what we have here, and I think it's fourth biggest now in Canada in terms of company, 75 billion or something is what I read. And to see someone come back to his roots is amazing, and if those roots are on top of it, Montreal, even better.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that'll bring a lot to Montreal, not the least of which, it's a statement of the importance of Montreal in the grand vision of Shopify, right? Like, I would be surprised if the president of Shopify would move to a city where Shopify will not continue to employ and hire a lot of people. So I think that's a good sign for the community as well. And of course, all the experience that he brings to the city, and the time that I spent with him when he was a mentor at Founder Fuel, I always felt he was very generous with his time. And so if he can give back to the local community, even better, right? We need more Shopifys, and having him here can only contribute to creating more of those, right? And creating those stimulating the entrepreneurial community. So I think it's, you know, there was a lot of articles about it, but it is a big deal.
Some people might be curious about what are some of the concrete ways having an entrepreneur like Harley moving back to the city can have. So, one example I can think of, just having more density in terms of entrepreneurs in the city is our experience when I was at bus.com raising our Series A. We actually got introduced to our lead for our Series A at bus.com through Francis Davison, the CEO and co-founder of Sonder. And so, that type of relationship and that ability to connect with other people who can unlock impact for your business is great. And having someone like Harley, who's working at one of the biggest tech companies in the city, having more access to be able to have those conversations and have those opportunities to interact with him is awesome. And so I don't know if Harley's going to start angel investing, or I'm sure is angel investing. The reality is you tend to invest more in people that you develop relationships with. And the fact that he's in the city, like I was saying a few minutes ago, we ran into him kind of organically or randomly at a restaurant in Westmount. The truth is, if he lived in Ottawa, that wouldn't have happened, right? And so just people being in the city help kind of spin the wheel faster of serendipity happening. So not sure exactly how it's going to play out, but I think it's always a good thing to have talented, smart, connected people back in our hometown driving impact.
Yeah.
I agree. And I think like success drives success. And, often one of the complaint we hear about Canada and then Quebec and Montreal is not pushing for like bigger businesses selling too early and so on. And we have still not that many examples with the size of Shopify. And the more we can have the kind of leaders that Shopify has proven Canada can build around to inspire other entrepreneurs who might just be getting started. That just creates kind of a very positive influence, I think, in the ecosystem. And
Mhm.
as you're saying, like if you can just bump into these people at a restaurant or at a cocktail event at Notman House or anywhere else, like it just creates really maybe that more like I ambition that we all hope for Montreal.
Mhm.
I'm really
Let's
impressed by the story and like how big it's gotten. I think it's a testament to the power of the brand of Shopify and also Harley as a person, right? Kind of like larger than life person, and so it's gotten huge. Even I saw la mairesse Madame Plante tweeting about it, like so it's great, but on the surface, it's like like executive from remote company moves back to hometown. Like it's a
Mhm.
very kind of like simple story. I think it's one of these like strategy credit that the Shopify is basically 100% remote, right? We forever as they've said. So Harley could have chosen to work from anywhere. It's really cool that he's done it from Montreal, but it's not a big news item in a sense of like he's going to be working from home, which will happen to be in Montreal. So I think it really speaks to like, holy shit, they're really good at PR. like, like I think we've all mentioned, I think it's overall obviously awesome for the ecosystem having someone like that. That's going to be able to, positively influence. I think we all have just great stories from Harley, but yeah, also hats off to their PR team.
Mhm. Yeah, I think
I think
even
it's
if sorry, and go ahead. I'll go after.
I, I was just going to make the point, like let's not forget. I don't know the exact words, but I've heard many executives from Shopify, including Harley, talk about how part of their mission is to enable entrepreneurs, right? And in this case, specifically around commerce and e-commerce. But I think that could have a secondary effect too, right? Like just sort of stimulating entrepreneurship in general, whether it's through e-commerce or some other methodology. But I think that could be a secondary impact too of him being back in his hometown.
Yeah. Yeah, even if Harley doesn't take one meeting with an entrepreneur in the city, doesn't make any angel investing, or doesn't do any angel investing, just the fact that he moved to Montreal, just the fact that he acknowledged publicly that Montreal is a great city to live, to work, to raise a family, I think is a positive sign. From what I understand or heard in the podcast, he had narrowed it down to 3 cities. So for all of our Toronto friends, sorry, Toronto wasn't in the top 3. It was between Montreal, New York, and Miami. And so, he kind of lived, from what I heard, in multiple cities or each one of those cities for a month. and then he realized Montreal was the place.
Well, he grew up in Miami, right?
Yeah,
Born in Montreal, grew up in Miami. But yeah.
And he said specifically a large part of the reason he wanted to raise his children in Montreal is that it was bilingual and because of the culture, right? And I think that's amazing. And he speaks a little bit of French, and he actually committed on a TV show or on a radio show to learn more French, which I think is great. But he also said that he's going to send his kids to French immersion, and so I think that's part of the reason he's here. And I think for a lot of us, that's why we're here. We love the city. We love the multiculturalism. We love the multi-language. We love what it is. And he just kind of had another opportunity to tell the world that's what we have here.
Mm-hmm. It's true. And it's a testament to just the quality of life in Montreal. And I think to build a great industry ecosystem, would it be tech or anything, you obviously need great career opportunities and a great lifestyle. That's what attracts, the young, smart people mostly. And I think Montreal is just as the ingredient to make it happen. And the more we have high-profile companies and high-profile entrepreneurs that are in the city and might attract new young talent that will become the next generation of Shopify
And
executive.
there are other examples of that too, right? Like Patrick Pichette, right? CFO, ex-CFO of Google, lived in the Valley for God knows how long and came back to Montreal, right? Like Montreal is a great place to live. It's just really exceptional. So
Yeah.
it's great to see another executive take that kind of move.
Yeah, I think you
And that
mentioned
was
something in.
a similar storyline for a lot of the folks at Real Ventures. I remember when Ian and I joined Real Ventures, I think every person that was on the team was in Montreal because they had moved to Montreal for family reasons and wanted to help make Montreal the type of city that you can build great companies from. And so John Stokes, Alan, JS was from Montreal but left and came back because of family reasons. That was a similar story for Ian and myself. And so the quality of life is definitely a massive draw to the city. We should talk to our friends at Montreal International about sponsoring this episode, I think.
That's a great idea.
Mark
Call
McLean, if
Mark.
you're out there.
Yeah.
Yeah, call
I like
Mark.
that. Taking note. Yeah,
He owes
taking
us
notes.
lunch. He owes us lunch, at least lunch.
And yeah, I think Ian, you mentioned something interesting because I always love Shopify for kind of their mission, right? So empowering more entrepreneurs, and with Harley here, maybe that'll be a good kind of like spark, right, to be able to bring more people to want to start companies and take that risk. And I think the other big news too this week was Damien Steel, right, like managing director of Omers, moving back as well to take the leadership and become CEO of DeepSky. So maybe obviously you're close to it, Eleonore. So I don't know how much you can or cannot say, but maybe give us the summary.
Yeah, I'm glad the news is out. We discussed Deep Sky a little bit on the previous episode. It's a company I'm personally extremely excited about. I think it can be a massive, massive win for Canada and all of us, as we definitely need more extremely smart people, ambitious people focusing on climate. And obviously, it was a big question mark for everyone. Like a great founding team. You have the guys from Opera, you have Lawrence Tosi, who kind of needs no introduction, but still CFO of Blackstone, Airbnb, one of the leader investor in New York. But you need a CEO. And obviously, speaking of Brightspark, we're still a huge shareholder of Opera. Everyone wanted Fred to still be extremely focused on Opera, and that's exactly what he's doing. You need like a CEO for it. And then, you know, I was joking internally, like, oh, like who can Fred pick as a CEO? Like, these kind of profiles are obviously like extremely picky. They need someone who can match their ambition and their skills and complement them as well. And when we got the confirmation that Damien was joining Deep Sky, we're like, there's no one else better for this job. And going back to our discussion as well, obviously having someone that has such a great career in tech in Canada, obviously very attached to the Toronto ecosystem, but has been spending a lot of time in Montreal over the years as well, committing not necessarily to move here, but spending a ton of time in Montreal, working for a Quebec-based company. I think it's another just great testament of attracting great talent and building really cool companies here.
Yeah, it's been a few years since I've seen Damien, but for many years we got really close. Starting from the early days of when I joined Password Box, he was a board member, of course, so he had led our A round. That was prior to me joining Password Box, but that's where I met him, and I got to know him quite a bit through Founder Fuel because he was a mentor, and I remember him vividly talking about how much he loved Montreal and the ecosystem here. And yes, he lived in Toronto, but he's big investor in Hopper, big investor in Password Box and many others. And I think this guy is incredibly smart. I was blown away when I
Mhm.
saw that he was going to be the CEO of DeepSky because I too was wondering, you know, Fred is busy with Hopper and it's a massive business, and I was like, how do you become the CEO of two businesses?
Mhm.
I know some people are doing it in the valley, but anyway, that's a different story. But I was really excited to see that Damien was going to take on that role, and like you said, Eleonore, like not only Canada needs this, but every human being needs people focused on climate, right? Like this is a big issue, and I think he's amazing. I think it'll be it's a perfect fit. It's really really good. And if I put myself in his shoes, to have Fred as my chairman and sort of helping me through all that, like that's an incredible experience to be able to you know to to have that role. Especially with having been so involved in the tech community over the last I don't know
Mhm.
how long, but I think it's amazing news.
Yeah. Yeah, same. I thought it was really exciting news. I had a similar question in my mind in terms of who would Fred be able to find that would be able to kind of keep up with his level of ambition and energy. And, I think Damien was a great choice. I was really excited to see that he was able to get him on board. I know them a little bit. As Ian said, Damien was a mentor at Founder Fuel, so I had a chance to talk to him a few times. Fred, I've been a few times at community events. And what was nice to see is even through the little bits of information that were shared in the media, you can see that there was a lot of mutual respect between the two of them, and it really felt like it was a great match. And I think that's gonna be great for the company in terms of having two people who have worked together, who trust each other, who want to make something happen and are rooting for each other to succeed. So it's really exciting. It's nice to see all of the momentum that they're getting and all of the excitement and the press. Like personally, I had heard about Deep Sky. Nectar told me a little bit about the presentation that Fred did at the climate conference because of Damien's news. There was a lot of it was all over LinkedIn, and he shared the presentation that Fred gave, I think, at that climate conference
Yes.
in Montreal. And it was amazing. Like I definitely recommend that everybody take some time and listen to it and get educated in terms of what's happening in the world related to all of the CO2 that's out there that needs to be put back into the earth. And so again, it's just another reason to kind of pound on the drum and spread the news about the importance of this project.
Mhm. And one point I want to add as well is I think in the first or maybe it was the second episode, we were talking about, venture sometime going back to the roots of really, backing high risk, but really high potential, ambitious businesses in this economic market and where with, all the challenges the world is facing right now. And that was before my time. So I'm sorry if I'm butchering some details on the story, but Omer's Ventures back then, they were probably one of the very few with Georgian Canadian VC on the Shopify cap table. They were in a hopper as well, and the team kind of just said, if we want to do venture right in Canada, we need to be in all those, probably the word unicorn wasn't even thrown around back then, but like all those huge businesses, all those extremely ambitious entrepreneurs, we're not going to be picky about the terms. We'll write them a term sheet. We'll support them no matter what through the ups and downs. And that's what they did. And I don't obviously know the financial detail. I'm sure they did pretty good with Shopify. They'll do very good with Opera as well. And Deep Sky is another great example of a business like that, where many investors look at it and they're like, wait, guys, you're backing this? Like, it's a lot of different risks than what we're used to seeing, but the potential is there and the ambition is there. And
Mhm.
I think it's going back to having extremely smart people attacking really, really hard problems is a root of venture, at least in my mind.
Mhm.
And it's great to see that. And something people might not know, but Damien is also a professional poker player. So I think there's no better guy to assess, take extremely calculated risk, and try to optimize for the win. So I hope that's what he's going to do with Deep Sky.
He's
Yeah,
he's
no,
pretty
it's
good
very
at
cool.
golf too, eh?
Yeah, it's pretty good at golf and has a really long, deep experience in finance as well. So it's a pretty awesome combination.
Yeah.
But I agree. I think the key word for me is ambition, right? I think, Ian, we talked about it. I think when Damien first joined Omers, you were saying that he was really pulling the fund towards a strategy to make big bets in, ambitious, impactful founders.
Yeah.
And Omers is a pension fund, I think the fifth or top 10 largest pension funds in the world. Pension funds are typically known to be more conservative, and Damien really made a consented effort to really make big bets and ambitious projects. And, I take my hat off to that. It was really exciting to see what he did during his time at Omers.
If
It-
I can, if my memory serves me well, the conversation I had with Damien was, it's simple. I have made a list of the smartest entrepreneurs and the most ambitious entrepreneurs in Canada, and I need to back every single one of them.
Mhm.
Those were the words I remember.
Yeah. And he didn't get into every deal, maybe because of
No,
timing or
but
whatever reason, but just having that mindset and wanting to really go big, I think is great.
it
That's what
makes a lot of
venture is
sense.
about, right?
I would just add, it makes a lot of sense also just in terms of the type of role, right? So someone you would be surprised, like as someone that has a bit more of a finance heavy background, but when you understand what Deep Sky's trying to do, it's like you're going to need a lot of capital, and also just not from an equity perspective. It's going to be a lot of different types of capital. If you look at like in their pitch is like we need to build basically an oil, gas, and industry equivalent in 10 to 20 years, right?
Mhm.
And I just sent you guys a link in the chat, and I think everyone should take the time, if you're listening, to watch Fred's presentation. It's on YouTube. That, like I said, maybe sit down and like breathe because it's pretty intense. If you only believe half of it, we're like, holy crap, right? So it's a super important, obviously, company, and like I think we're all kind of like, fans of what they're trying to do, and we think it's important. And yeah, going back to Damien, it makes a lot of sense. A really smart move, and it feels like a company at their level of maturity to be able to get someone like him. It just speaks to the ambition and really the potential of what they're trying to do.
Mhm. And it's exciting. I think we segued into the conversation around Damien because we were talking about entrepreneurs and executives moving back to the city. And so he'll be in Montreal as well, right? The HQ of Deep Sky, from what I understand, is based out of Montreal, definitely out of Quebec. And so he'll be in the city. And from what I can imagine, it's only the start. I
Yep.
don't know how much they've raised, but they need to build their executive team. They're going to be building their core team. You'll have a lot of smart people who are thinking about this problem, who understand the technology behind this problem and how to scale it, that will be kind of congregating around Montreal and trying to figure out things.
Hmm. Yeah, one thing that's Deep Sky is doing that is obviously very inspired and influenced by how Upper built their team. There's two big theses in that, which is one, you hire the best possible people from anywhere in the world. So that capacity of hiring pretty distributed and really finding the best talent, but keeping that HQ where your roots are, which is Opera. Opera has done exactly that. It's still a Quebec-based company. You will always tie back, Opera to Montreal, but you have people everyone around the globe, and a lot of the talent actually Americans were leading some of parts of the upper business units actually decided to move to Montreal. There's a lot of example of that just inside Opera. Deep Sky is kind of taking the same approach on it. And the second fold is really believing in young emerging leaders that are extremely smart and providing the right kind of leadership for them to thrive and for them to really operate as almost mini startups inside the company. Like Opera has hired a lot of ex early stage founders were maybe not working on the right problem, but said, we want your team and you'll be operating inside Opera. We'll provide the guidance, we'll have the leadership to make sure this company is always well capitalized and going in the right direction, but we'll give you a ton of autonomy because we hire you because we believe you're the best person to do this job. And this is exactly what these guys started to do with, so the team is still super small, around 10 people. But the kind of quality of people, like they hired Phil DeLuna, who was I don't remember the exact title, but something like head of carbon at McKinsey. And the guy is super young, early in his career, but the smartest person around this topic. They came across and convinced him to join the company, and he's operating inside DeepSky again with a lot of autonomy. And I think it's a model that's super interesting for Canada, of trying to like hire the best people in the world, but bring them back here, make sure there's a tie here, and invest in those people in the next generation of talent.
Yeah, I think we talked about it a little in the last episode. I think we're all excited about this movement of tech entrepreneurs into climate startups because of that mindset, right? I heard similar feedback around the culture at Hopper. I think Eleonore, both you and I know someone in common who was at Front Row and who was a student of mine at McGill, who was leading Hopper's growth initiatives. And I was always amazed to hear stories from him in terms of how much autonomy he had, but how much impact he was having. And I think he earned that impact because extremely smart. Like right away, I could tell he was one of the brightest in the class, extremely hardworking, but given a platform to really be able to do something special. And not all organizations are built that way. And so it's, some people might ask the question, how does having a company that's connected to an organization run by an entrepreneur like Fred have? That's how. It's the culture. He's really infusing that mindset and that culture in this organization so they can act like a startup and move like a startup, which is super exciting.
Yeah, on that point, Eleanor, I find it fascinating. It's not too common, that type of operating model you mentioned. And I think of the example of Dakota. That's, I think, today technically CEO of Hopper, if I'm not mistaken, or like basically, one of the
He's the
key exec.
president of Opera.
And he started, I think, design. Like he was doing design, and then gradually took over growth. And like I met him, he was like handling all growth, and like basically today, almost like essentially running almost all the operations. It really speaks to like, get smart people, give them autonomy, and let them grow. Right? It's kind of a neat concept, and the way they've actually built it, I think, is like I said, a good example to follow.
I think that's a great example of hire for potential, not for experience. Sometimes you hire someone who has all the experience and they come in and they're like, here's how you do ABC. And you're like, is it really how we want to do ABC? Like, doesn't matter how whatever company did it. This is not that whatever company. And I want to sort of question everything and build the way that we want to build, right? And so hiring for potential, not for experience, is at least one of the things that I live by. And I think it sounds like that's a very similar
Yes.
common trait, right? Which is like, sometimes it's not good to hire someone that has all the experience.
True. Because what worked previously, as you said, might not be what will work
hmm
in the future.
And certainly, I remember, like, I'm sort of going on a tangent, but like when all that growth hacking craze was like, oh, Airbnb made the button blue, let's make it blue. Yeah, blue buttons work. I'm like, what are you talking about? It's fucking bullshit, right? Like similar kind of thing. It's like what works elsewhere doesn't necessarily work here. You got to figure out what works for you.
And you know what? When you looked at a lot of the companies that, popped during the pandemic tech craziness, I feel like everyone sometimes was like, some playbook was going around about like, oh, you want to build an e-com company, this is what you do. You want to build a B2C company, this is what you do. And like everything just sounded like, I've seen this many times before. And this is not how you build true innovation. And I think, what we're seeing in the market is a good proof again, like the real innovators will succeed, but every copycat company is harder to maintain as a success for sure.
So what do you guys want to talk about next? Do we make the faithful leap and talk about our media landscape, or any other topics you guys want to talk about?
Yes.
Yes, I think we have to.
We have to.
Yeah. So like
What
in
is
this,
this nonsense?
yeah, in the spirit of this podcast, we try and cover, I guess, relevant news, and like one that's been bubbling up for the past few months, but one that's come to a head is famous Bill C18, and maybe I'll just give a bit of context. So I have a prepared note just for people that don't know. So it's called the Online News Act, and it's a framework that requires digital giants, basically Google and Facebook, to develop agreements with Canadian news, provide them for compensation for sharing online news through links or other means. So it's like a bargaining framework essentially that's going to force Google and Facebook to say, hey, you have to pay for any links, any news links that are shared through our platforms. And Google and Facebook, and in particular Facebook, said, well, if you don't want to sharing any news link, great, we'll just shut off all the news links. And like Canada was like, no, that's not what we meant. And so it's basically, what's the expression, a bras de fer? It's become like a wrestling match between basically the Canadian government and Google and Facebook today. I can speak a lot to it, but before I go on a rant, I'll kick it to any of you if you want to start. Ian, you want to take it?
Do I want to kick it off? I mean, when I saw this coming, like I couldn't help myself but laugh. I'm like, who does the Canadian government think they are that they're going to influence, or media or whatever, whoever put this rule in place, think they are that they're going to force Facebook, to pay them or whatever. It's like, the big question on my mind is, hey, name Canadian media. How much traffic are you seeing today versus prior to when Facebook blocked you? And then you tell me how you want to monetize your content. Like, guarantee the traffic is down. So they're losing money. It's ridiculous. I think it is a a a I'm looking for the right the right qualifier, but I think it's a dumb tactic. I mean, I don't have any other qualifier than that. I just think it's ridiculous. How do you think you can influence someone like Facebook or Google by putting that type of thing in place?
Yeah.
It's just never going to happen.
I feel like I have a unique perspective on this particular file just because I've worked on the agency side. Started my career working like buying ads from traditional news organizations as well as Google and Facebook. Then I worked at Google, like selling Google ads. And then at my previous company where we're doing consulting, we did multiple corporate strategy mandates for the well-known media players I won't mention, but the brands we all recognize, trying to help them basically survive. So we did like a good 5 or 6, some digital and some traditional ones as well. So I went under the hood to see exactly the impact of what is a declining industry, right? So that's what's essentially happening is traditional news is like, we're all on social media. You see what traditional news has to fight against. So maybe to my particular position is I'm like not pro tech, but I'm not anti big tech. I'm actually more pro news, like pro journalism, like it should exist, right? Because if it wasn't, like my past life, I wouldn't have taken these mandates where I personally led trying to help these news organizations. If it wasn't like, if I didn't believe in, like journalism is a really good thing. And I think Ian, you kind of mentioned is like this law kind of like it flips where the value lies, right? So like Facebook and Google are providing free traffic today to the news outlets, and so like by saying, hey, well, all this free traffic now is going to cost Facebook and Google money is kind of say reversing the model, right? Because Facebook's the one that's creating the value for news organizations. The way it's portrayed in the media is like, oh, Google and Facebook are the ones stealing our profits, but it's like it's the internet, right? Like there's just better advertising options, right? And if you're a marketer today, you have a fiduciary responsibility to create good ROI in your campaigns and not to support local media. Like it's a nice after effect if you can, but if you're seeing better ROI in Google ads or Facebook ads, you're not going to think twice. So I find it very unfortunate. I find it's hurting the smaller players much more than the big news outlets, right? Like Bell and CTV and like Globe and Mail. They're kind of survived. They'll survive more hurt, I find, but it's going to accelerate the demise of smaller, more independent journalism. And maybe like the end game here for me is not clear as to how we get out of this mess. Unfortunately,
Isn't it interesting how the pendulum has switched? If you remember, has swung. If you remember, I remember vividly when I forget who it was exact, but Facebook or whoever invented like the share button, And everyone was like, "Oh my God, let's put this on my news piece because now if someone's reading this, they'll share it on Facebook and all their friends will see it and it's going to drive all kinds of traffic back to me and yay, I got more eyeballs." And now they're like, "Wait a second, that doesn't work." It's like, come on, guys, you got to, it's you got to reinvent yourself. I don't know what the right solution is, right? Because it is a declining industry, but like, you're actually, I don't think this is the right path. Like, you're actually hurting yourself more than you're helping yourself. And
Hmm.
unfortunately, like you said, I think the way it's being portrayed in the media is just upside down, right? It's not good.
Yeah, it's an evolving industry, like many other like industries are just completely changed by tech and other factors. And I'm not an expert on this topic at all, but it just seems like Canada made a bold move without really thinking strategically about it. And curious, Nectar, have you heard kind of some media outlets responding to this publicly, or and other question I was asking myself is, is this kind of a copied from another country who did something similar and it worked? Like, is there any precedent of countries doing something similar?
Yeah, the famous stories with one in Australia, right? So they tried to do this in Australia, and then kind of similar thing, and then they ended up kind of like coming up to an agreement. I think the Canadian government saw this and was emboldened and proposed legislation that was a little bit more intense in terms of like every single link, and the exact payment with Australia isn't clear. And it's also very fishy because it's like Australia is like one big oligopoly in terms of their media, like with Rupert Murdoch
Mhm.
essentially. So it's like, sure, like media can is, in my view, journalism is positive, but it's like it's evil corporation trying to take advantage of the situation as well, right? And you can say they're both evil or whatever. And from what I've seen publicly, I don't think the big news companies haven't said much, but the smaller ones have. Like, there's one journalist I follow that I pay for. This guy Christopher Curtis, ex Montreal Gazette journalist, has like a Substack, and basically the new model of journalism is going direct to readers. He has a bunch of paying subscribers, and he's like, he can't share his stuff anymore.
Mm.
And it's like
I
one
didn't
dude, right?
realize.
Like,
Yeah.
and it really hurts the small independent publishers. And if you think of how the internet works, it's all about niches, right? So like the big general news is there's only going to be a few handful of players, right? So like the New York Times equivalent, right? There's going to be a few that will survive, but then on the smaller end there should be a much wider array of independent journalists that are doing the work. That's kind of what the industry is going to net out to be. And we're end up shooting ourselves in the foot, I find, by not allowing the smaller, more independent publishers to flourish, right? Because they can't anymore. They don't have the means of distribution, like the means of, like filling up their car with gas today, which is basically Google and Facebook. You might not like that reality, but that's what it is today.
Yeah. Like Eleanor, I don't know much about the topic, but I'm surprised. Well, one thing, I do believe that some of these large tech companies are building a lot of power that allows them to push people, governments, communities around. And so I believe in a check and balance in terms of understanding how to level the playing field, because a lot of these companies are, from like a GDP perspective, even are larger than countries. But at the same time, I'm surprised that the people who are advising the government on the realities of how the dynamics work
Yeah.
weren't more informed in terms of understanding the fundamentals. From a distance, again, as someone who, is readily admitting that I know very little about this space, it seems pretty black and white or clear that it wouldn't make sense to try to structure the relationship in this way. And so for me, I guess the part of this story that resonates the most is, are we still living in an age where government is still so disconnected from what's happening in business or in community? And I think that's a problem. Like, we need to find a way to get people kind of out of the echo chamber and get them in front of real information.
That's so true. And one thing that maybe is unwarranted, but that scares me a little bit with just everything we saw, obviously with like the Trump campaign and fake news in the US, like the idea of blocking real professional news on social media platform, and then having just more what the social media algorithm will push to you and maybe hasn't been written by a professional journalist is just extremely scary to me more than anything.
I just
I
subscribed
mean,
to Ian's TikTok for news. So
I
Thanks for the
was
tip.
going to say, just going back to what you were saying, Gabriel, like to me, that is the consciousness of the government is a real thing. Like, I will pick on a couple examples that happened in the last few years. Like, there was this growing community wanted to do like a Google for Quebec, and I'm like, the fuck you talking about? Like, or an Amazon for Quebec? Like, I get it. Like, we need to support, like, say on the Amazon for Quebec thing, we need to support local producers. I'm 100% for that. But it's not by replicating, going back to our example of before, what Amazon did for Quebec that's going to solve the problem. We have to find other solutions. You're not going to change Amazon. People are going to buy Amazon. I publicly, and I'll say it again, like when we had the initiative around, of course, I'm blanking on the name, the car sharing, God damn it, the Quebec
Geotaxi.
Live rights?
Taxi,
Okay,
taxi.
taxi.
Like, you know, it was a bold move to try to build that business, but it was too late.
Yeah.
There was just no way in hell were you going to stop Uber. The ship has sailed. And, it was not quite the same thing. It was green and all that stuff, but it was just never going to happen. Right. And so I think that, and, obviously it was supported by many different levels of government. My point is, there are just things that are happening that, uh, are beyond like what our government can do, and we got to find other ways to do it as opposed to replicate or block. And your point, Eleonore, is right. Like, I mean, if we block all the Canadian news off of Facebook, guess what? People are going to keep on being on Facebook, and where they're going to get, like whatever crap the algorithm gives them, as opposed to putting the good stuff in there and hoping that the good news gets to them. So I don't know. It's just
Yeah, I think what you're alluding to is it's very difficult to change kind of embedded user behavior. If somebody's using Uber, if it's a better product, yes, you might remember to book with TO Taxi because you want a green ride or you want to support a local company. But if that TO Taxi doesn't show up in 5 minutes and there's an Uber there in 3 minutes, guess what? You're going to get out of the cold. You're going to get into the Uber. It's never cold in Montreal. It's warm, sunny all the time. We love Montreal. But you're going to get out and you're going to get into that Uber. That's just the reality. And same thing for Amazon, right? Amazon has built a great business. Of course, there's a lot of drawbacks in terms of the business as well. But in terms of convenience, in terms of how fast you can get packages, in terms of the variety that you can get, it is hard to beat. And so you need to align with what's happening, I think is what you're saying. Be conscious, be realistic about what's happening out there, and build a business, make a decision to build something that's
yeah.
of value versus try to use legislation or other tactics to try to force the hand. Because I think that's one of the things I loved about building online businesses is the user is going to decide. The user votes with their dollars or their time, and it's nothing else that's going to drive user behavior. And if you build a better user experience, you're going to get users, and they're going to either pay you in time or pay you in money.
I think we need to make conscious decisions for those things. It's very easy to order your toilet paper on Amazon. You can just as well go to the grocery store and get it, right? It's going to take you 10 minutes as opposed to 1 minute, but make that conscious decision to go buy it at your local store as opposed to order. I'm using toilet paper as an example, but whatever, right? A book, just go to the bookstore as opposed to order it on Amazon. That's a better way to support the local economy than to put legislation around things like this.
Yeah, and creating like incentive to generate the kind of consumer behavior you want. Like obviously, like I think one thing Canada did really well was taxes on cigarettes. Like when you compare to other countries, I think that I don't remember what exactly the data says, but like it's working slowly but surely, and we'll probably see exactly the same thing with gas pretty soon. Like those kind of fiscal or regulation moves help, but then it's kind of slowly building consumer behavior towards a path where you want them to go, instead of trying to pull something as drastic as the regulation we're seeing with Bill C18. And
Mhm.
it's just, again, like, the word is evolving, and you kind of need, as a government, to adapt to it and work with the big other forcing aspect happening that is not necessarily political.
Yeah.
And even like what Europe has been doing with GDPR, I think, is probably as like a net to put a very positive impact on how internet companies behave in Europe, and protecting internet users and so on. There's probably stuff to be done on the regulation side, but it's not that drastic and not that kind of ill informed, I would say.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
That's what
would
I
I would
wonder.
lean.
I can play devil's advocate and kind of argue against myself. I also, at the same time, think that some of these companies, like I'm saying, are so large that you need someone at some scale to be able to push back. So I just don't know where the answer is.
That's fair.
Yeah, there's a few points. I think that I agree with what you said, Gabriel, and that I think government's role is to provide regulation, but it has to be done. I think no one's questioning their intention, right? So I think the intentions are good, right? Even with Amazon Quebec and with the bill, it's like protect journalism, but you have to have a mindset of understanding the current chessboard, right? If
Yeah,
you look at the 1990s, where there's like five news outlets, that world is gone, its ship has sailed. And actually, I would disagree with you, Eleanor, on GDPR. I think it's been horrible for competition, because what you've seen is it's just entrenched Facebook and Google. Essentially, that's what GDPR has done, right? So it's like the big incumbents welcome regulation, because they're just pulling the ladder out from behind them, right? Sure, regulate us, it's all good, right? So like you got to see it with OpenAI today. You're going to Washington, yes, let's regulate OpenAI and AI and LLMs. It's like no
They're
other
two
startups
steps
can even
ahead.
compete.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think that's the takeaway for me, is that there needs to be more knowledgeable people in government that
Mhm.
understand technology to craft the proper legislation, right? So
yeah,
Yeah.
legislation is needed, and government's there to to set the rules, right? Not be a participant on the field. That's what it's trying to do, and I think it seems
yeah.
wrong to me.
I think you said it well. Like, I can't agree more with with the intention, right, of protecting, in this case, like the local media, but the execution of it is just
Mhm.
terrible,
Yeah.
right? It's just bad. Intention is right, and the execution is bad, and therefore the outcome will not be good either.
Yeah. I like the analogy of knowing the chessboard. I admit that I think for a lot of these topics, especially related to government regulation, I don't know if I fully understand the chessboard, and I see it from one perspective, and that's like a very specific vantage point. And so, what I would hope is for our leaders in government to understand the full chessboard. That's what I would hope, and I'm fine. I have my opinion. It might be limited, but the people who are making the rules, I hope, understand what all the pieces are and what the consequences would be.
Mhm.
It reminds me, remember those videos where Mark Zuckerberg was at in court and they were asking questions and everyone's like, "Oh my God, like, are these real questions?" Remember that?
Oh, where this I don't know if it was senators or someone were asking
Something
questions
like
about
that.
like the
Yeah,
internet that it was
That
like, oh
was
my,
scary.
yeah,
yeah. It was a couple years ago, right?
Yeah.
yeah. But I don't know. For some reason, I'm biased to believe that Canada is a little bit more progressive in terms of being more connected. I don't know if that's biased because our prime minister is a little bit younger. I don't know why that is, but I kind of expect more in terms of being in touch of reality related to the way that technology impacts society.
Yeah. So I think this podcast will transform into politics above anything. So I think
I'm
it's
going to have my people review this podcast to make sure I didn't say
That's
anything.
right.
yeah, go through PR. I think it's a great way to end it, guys. Unless you have any other topics.
I have one final question for you, Nectar. What's the name of your dog?
My dog, if you can see in the background, his name is Slash, and
Slash.
I
he's
love it.
Guns N' Roses
objectively,
Slash?
yeah, not like people are like, oh, like backslash, no, like the guitarist.
It depends on the generation you're speaking to.
Yeah, yeah. I'm a kid of the '80s, basically. So yeah. And
And
he's
maybe one last comment. You can edit it out, Nectar, if you want to. But for all those entrepreneurs out there who understand the struggle, Nectar is recording this podcast at the same time as babysitting. Babysitting is not the right word. Watching his.
Ooh, I think we need to edit that out.
Yeah, we need to edit. We definitely need to edit that out. That came out wrong, but
it's staying for sure.
taking care of his new young bored child, who I think is off camera somewhere to the side. So it's part of the realities of building something and having a young family. Is sometimes you have to multitask. So
She
great
didn't
job.
make sense, but it would have been completely okay if she did.
Yeah,
It would
maybe
have been
we'll have
completely.
a guest that we've talked about guests. So I'll bring her on as a guest for the next episode.
Yes, please.
All right, awesome guys. Thank you so much.
Thank guys.
Thank you.